Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
I'm Jeff. I'm the president of this year organization, and so I will hold you hostage for an evening. All right. Human beings have been participants in and observers of migration from the beginning. As climate patterns shifted 40 to 10,000 years ago, some theories posit that bands of human beings braved the land bridge spanning Asia and North America, following herds of migrating animals they were dependent upon for survival. Centuries later, news of refugees and asylum seekers at borders throughout the world reveals that due to persecution, political instability, economic factors, and the hope of a new life, migration remains encoded in our makeup as human beings. Not only creatures of migration themselves, the development of scientific knowledge, environmental consciousness, and dare I say even hobbies, have influenced humans to observe migrating creatures with awe and wonder. The yearly spring influx of birds from sometimes thousands of miles away and their outgoing autumnal escape captures imaginations anew, heralds the change of seasons, and creates a whole category of serious but friendly observers known as birders. I count myself as one of them. Those words are how I began a shot-in-the-dark application for a clergy renewal grant from the Lilly Endowment. These grants give leaders of religious communities, like myself, funding for a sabbatical, a time of renewal and refreshment, doing something that makes their hearts sing. Well, for me, birding makes my heart sing. So I thought, why not put together a project that gets me birding in fun, far-flung places where I could experience birds I never have before. So myself and the congregation submitted a proposal that would have us explore intersections of human and creaturely migration by sending me to places where those things overlap in unique and imagination-expanding ways. The grant was actually awarded. I can't believe it. The proposal was approved, and I was off for 4 months of rest and rejuvenation to look for migrating and vagrant birds in southeast Arizona, in western Alaska, and New Jersey, New York, and to learn about the human experience of immigration. In short, I was to be about birds, borders, and integrating the two to see what could be learned in holding these things together. During the final days of April, I flew off to southeast Arizona to attend the Southwest Wings Spring Fling Birding Festival in Sierra Vista, to spend time alone at Madera Canyon near Green Valley, and to have a border immersion experience. Of course, this was exciting. Southeast Arizona, as many of you know, is a wonderful place to bird, with a variety of habitats from Sonoran and Chihuahuan Desert to golf courses and sewage treatment ponds and sky islands, all home to amazing, colorful resident birds, but also stopover points for migrating birds, or even playing host to occasional or vagrant species, which are usually found on the other side of our arbitrary national line. Those considered to be more from over there than from over here. The birds, of course, are blissfully unaware of any of our ideas of where they belong, to the delight of birders who celebrate their disregard of our drawn lines. So let's start with some birds, shall we? I'm going to try to get through some of these slides rather quickly, but first, a caveat. I'm not a photographer. I got a camera as part of this grant, so I'm still learning. My family says, especially my wife who is here, over there, says that I don't know the rule of thirds. I don't even know what she's talking about. I don't know. Also, I might go a bit over time today, so if you need to leave, please do, but I will take it deeply personally. So, some usual species of the region in southeast Arizona, many of which I've heard and seen before in previous trips there, but nevertheless were a delight to encounter. Things like Mexican jay, Inca dove, western tanager, ash-throated flycatcher, and Lucy's warbler. If you can pick it out of there in the middle, blends in very well.
Oh, yeah.
Lucy's warbler. The ash-throated, actually, a couple of these were at Fort Bowie National Historic Site in Arizona. It's a national park site that you can't drive to. You have to hike a couple miles into the visitor center. So that was kind of fun. The Pyrrhuxia up there, the painted redstart, Scott's oriole, and the black-throated gray warbler, and ladder-backed woodpecker. Perhaps if you've been to Arizona, some of these are quite familiar to you. The kids love the Pyrrhuxia, of course, for the haircut.
Did you see it? Yeah.
Phinopepla, Arizona woodpecker, rufous crowned sparrow, which is just a little drab bird I was super excited to find because I was by myself hiking and I was looking for it, and I play a call every quarter of a mile to try to see if one would respond, and finally it did. I was pretty happy about that. Gambel's quail and vermilion flycatcher.
What time of the year were you there?
This is late April, early May. Next, we get to see some of the migrant and visiting birds, specialty birds of the area, some of which are more associated with habitats south of the border. Birds like bronzed cowbird. Maybe you didn't know that there's more than just brown-headed cowbirds out there, but bronzed cowbird. Also, and this violates kind of what I just said, the Townsend's warbler, which has got a stick in front of it because I'm not a photographer, as I said before. The Townsend's warbler is probably going to cross multiple international borders, coming up from Central or South America, across the southern border, and then perhaps across the Canadian border up to Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, and so on. Thick-billed kingbird, we got to see, as well as elf owl. I don't know how to take photos during the day, how I managed to get one at night. I'm not quite sure. One of our field trips was going to the Chiricahua Mountains, and as you climb up the Chiricahua Mountains, which is a sky island, so it's an entirely different temperature as you go up, there's a place called Pinery Canyon, and our guide had known where a Mexican spotted owl had been roosting. And so we were able to see a Mexican spotted owl, which may in the future become its own species, divided from the other spotted owls that are more associated with California and the Pacific Northwest. Such a cute face. Buff-breasted flycatcher, another Mexican Central American species that we were able to catch in Arizona.
It's a good picture there, Jeff.
Thank you, thank you. I'm so upset with some of the difference between my screen here and the projector, but whatever. Why not? Greater peewee, illuminated there by the lights. Mexican chickadee. So there's a small dot in the Chiricahua Mountains where we get Mexican chickadee in the United States. Blue-throated mountain gem. So a variety of hummingbirds, of course, in Arizona. Mostly, I think, fall is the time. The monsoon season is really a time to rack up a bunch of different kinds of hummingbirds. Red-faced warbler. So I did some hiking at Madera Canyon, went on the Josephine Saddle Trail, 2.5, 3 miles, up to another elevation. Came across a number of red-faced warbler. Warblers? What's the plural of warbler?
Warblers.
Warblers. Sounds like it should be warbler. I mean, who knows? Also up there in Madera Canyon, came across yellow-eyed junco, which maybe if you've been in that area before, you've seen before. Yellow-eyed junco. Ramsey Canyon in the Sierra Vista area had great looks of sulfur-bellied flycatcher. So sulfur-bellied flycatcher is a species you find from Mexico down to Costa Rica. But it makes its way up to Arizona every once in a while. I was also paying attention to some rare bird reports while I was down there, of course, because you don't know what's going to pop up. And there was a report that over in Montosa Canyon, which is near to Madera Canyon near Green Valley, Arizona, there was a 5-striped sparrow seen the last couple of days, which is a primarily Mexican sparrow. And so I went down there and was able to locate it pretty quickly, actually. So 5-striped sparrow, as well as in the same area, northern beardless tranulette. Yeah. And I always thought before, like, what if one of these showed up here? Would I be able to tell the difference between that and a regular Empid flycatcher? And I think maybe after after seeing it. Like that nice little haircut, and it is different. Northern beardless tarantula. Of course, the reason why many people go to Southeast Arizona looking for birds is to see this fellow. So the elegant trogon. It took our field trip group, a couple of tries to find this one at Cave Creek Canyon in the Chiricahua Mountains. I would see another at Madera Canyon when I was there a couple of days later as well. Super cool bird that sounds kind of like a cross between a pig and a dog, I think. It's kind of like a little whoa, whoa, whoa kind of a sound you can hear echoing down the canyon. Pretty much flew right on top of us. It's hard to maybe tell from where you are, but the undertail, there's just this really fine patterning, almost like stencil kind of thing going on. It's very pretty. As the intensive birding portion of my time in Southeast Arizona came to a close, it was time for a border immersion experience. This would involve a trip to the border wall with John, a friend of some of my congregation members, who was involved in humanitarian and resistance work with a group there called the Samaritans. Together, I would learn from the work of his group, engage in humanitarian assistance, and have a brief glimpse into the contemporary situation at the border. And this helicopter there is one thing that I saw while trying to bird. It was actually a little bit distracting as it came and went. I asked somebody who was next to me, how often this happens, that the helicopters drop. And they said that the Border Patrol helicopters are not a regular occurrence unless they're looking for somebody in particular, a person of interest that they heard word of. But still, it's interesting looking up for birds and having this helicopter coming back and forth as well. As I traveled throughout the region, signs of the border situation were omnipresent. There were occasional checkpoints on both the freeway and back roads. These were almost always empty of any Border Patrol personnel, although there were a number of Border Patrol vans and trucks coming and going. One thing I thought about is the similarity between the travel caution signs and similar signs that we often see for Animal Crossing. The night before my visit to the border, I stayed with an organization called Border Links, based in Tucson. This organization hosts individuals and groups who are there to learn more about the ins and outs of immigration experience, immigration causes, immigration law, or who might be there just to do humanitarian work in service of migrants coming across the border claiming asylum. While I was at Border Links, there was a family of 3 who had been awarded a distant asylum hearing, but had no family connections in America to stay with. So Border Links was serving as their home until that day arrived. As you can see, it's kind of just cubicles, basically, little cubicle rooms. This was my room, complete with bunk beds there. The next morning at 4:30, my guide John picked me up and we headed toward a small border village called Sasabe, Arizona, where we met up with other Samaritans. As we traveled, we looked for crested caracara to no avail. But we did count 5 Border Patrol vans and 12 trucks. See, we're murderers, so we had to count. We have to count something. Some of these were carrying rounded up migrants to local detention centers for processing or for incarceration. In Sasabe, the Samaritans have a storage room filled with food, water, clothes, socks, diapers, hygiene products, pet food, things required for addressing immediate needs, first aid stuff, and also things that might be needed for the rest of an extended journey. So we collected some of those items, some fresh fruit as well. Must have been a Costco nearby. And we headed toward the border. And there it is, the border wall. I wasn't expecting it to be made of slats like this. I actually imagined that it would be taller. It was tall enough. My guide, John, he shared that he believes that the exact height is intentionally the height at which vertigo sets in, so that those who scale it are unlikely to do so successfully, falling to injury or perhaps death. The landscape around the wall was the expected airy, rocky, mountainous terrain, but as we drove along it, it took on a bit more of a through-the-looking-glass character. A sort of blurry quality that made it seem like another world lay just beyond. Our plan was to travel to the end of the road, which terminates at the end of the wall. We were going to hopefully meet up with some migrants who have gathered there. But there was construction underway. Actually, they were replacing a culvert on this road. There's also been quite a bit of construction to pave the road for ease of access for both the Border Patrol and their work, and also for ease of access for those contracted to weld repairs in sections that have been torched, and for those contractors tasked with fixing the portions that are washed out every monsoon season. So the wall is built across a number of natural washes that every season get destroyed. And so because we were unable to travel down the road any further than we did, we changed plans and decided to visit an immigrant encampment that is along the road. The encampment is a place where migrants can stop over for food, water, shade, clothing, and rest. While it is a place that Border Patrol routinely visits to round folks up, they also sometimes bring people there who are in need, knowing that they will be cared for by the Samaritans and others doing work there. There was actually a camp host of sorts, an individual from New Hampshire who came there to be of service. When we got to the encampment, we encountered a surprising reality. There were no migrants there. There was a northern beardless terangulite calling from the trees, but there were no human migrants. We thought maybe all of those BP vans that we passed might have rounded up folks before we arrived. They had been coming earlier in the day. But the host let us know that while those were likely full of migrants, there hadn't been anybody at the camp for a few days. Fighting in the villages on the Mexican side of the border had put a stop to the flow of people for a time. Those fleeing danger to reach the border did not want to be caught in the crossfire of warring factions, and so were likely staging until it was safe to move. So our group got to work in cleaning up the encampment and restocking necessities in hopes that they would be helpful whenever migrants showed up on their journey. The lack of human migrants was not the only surprising thing about this border immersion. I ran into someone I know. In the middle of nowhere, in the desert, on the Arizona-Mexico border. I went to college with Laura at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa 20 years ago, where we played on the same ultimate frisbee team. She was doing her own immersion experience working for the Center for Victims of Torture, an organization interested in how immigrants are treated when they are captured and detained. This wasn't the only unexpected thing. As you can see, sometimes the border wall turns into a basic barricade. Sometimes the border wall just stops because it's unable to be built upon unblastable mountains. I was also surprised to see huge scrap piles there consisting of former incarnations of the border wall left for someone or no one else to clean up. Also surprising, every once in a while my guide would jump out of the vehicle and place a sticker along the wall. It represents a Buddhist story of mutual help and community. From our time at the encampment along the wall, my guide John and I ventured into Coronado National Forest for what's called a water run. We brought gallons of water, granola bars, socks, and cans of Vienna sausages with us. Can anyone guess why we brought cans of Vienna sausages?
They're indestructible.
They're indestructible. What might be looking to destruct them?
Eat.
What's that?
Eat.
Coatamundi. Little desert raccoon guys can get into anything, but they have not yet figured out the Vienna sausage can. We came to a known stopover spot to resupply and to clean up. It was under a tree in a little ravine, nice kind of shady spot. Those guiding groups of migrants know about this and other spots, so they are in need of routine updates in food, water, and clothing. Along the way, we kept our eyes and ears open for others who might be watching us. Weekend warrior militia types sometimes patrol the area and dismantle the rest stations that the Samaritans set up. After this, we returned to Tucson, and I continued on to Phoenix so I could catch my flight back home to my native habitat. I was looking forward to a time of rest, to catching the migration here in Duluth, and to get ready for the next imagination-expanding adventure, Alaska. Yeah.
Did you see any roadrunners?
I see. Yeah. Yep. Saw roadrunners, especially in the Las Ciénegas grassland, south and east of Tucson. Yeah. Yeah, there's a ton more pictures I had to sort through and leave out and all that kind of stuff. Roadrunners and others. Any particular questions on the Arizona phase of things here before I move on to Alaska?
Was there any discussion about the way that the wall impacts populations of animals or terrestrial?
Yeah, there's a couple of discussions that I had regarding that. First of all, in regards to domesticated animals, there are, historically, this is a ranching area along the border. So there's a number of ranchers who have had their range restricted because of the border wall. Also, of course, the border cuts across indigenous people's land in that area. And so it kind of restricts the flow of not only themselves, but the animals that they care for as well. Also, there is the Sierra Club Southwest, or Arizona, I'm not sure what the organization's actual name is, looks into a lot of how the border wall affects the movement of things like jaguar, which might come up from Mexico and Central America, whose range used to extend further into Arizona, but is becoming more and more rare in that area. So jaguar at least came up when it comes to that.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about how like butterflies and things might be affected too,
Yeah.
as they make their way.
There's just as we're thinking about warming and shifting the ranges of things, it seems like it creates some
Yeah,
problems.
yep, exactly. Gregory, you kind of have your hand sort of up.
I noticed you didn't send any pictures of hawks or eagles. Did you see anything like that?
Oh yeah, I mean there was Harris's hawk. Were there any other hawks or eagles? I can't think of any right now. But this is a long time ago now, so I forgot more than I remember.
Any golden eagles down there?
No golden eagles. No.
White-tailed goose.
So, this adventure had a few different phases. First, I enjoyed an 11-hour layover in San Francisco, where I caught a ferry to Angel Island, which is the West Coast version of Ellis Island. I then flew to Anchorage and enjoyed a day of birding with someone from the local Audubon Society there. I then met and traveled with a group from High Lonesome Tours from Anchorage to Gamble on St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea for their Siberian Express birding tour. After that, my wife joined me for a trip to Kotzebue, which is above the Arctic Circle, for some national park touring. We then went to Seward and the Kenai Fjords National Park to finish up our time in Alaska. We got around. So this adventure began at the San Francisco Ferry Terminal, where I boarded a boat headed to Angel Island State Park. I had distant foggy views of Golden Gate Bridge and Alcatraz. I arrived at Angel Island and decided to walk to the immigration station rather than take the provided golf cart ride. This was for the reason of hopefully lucking into an oak titmouse or California scrub jay, both of which I missed. So I have to go back. The naming of this place as an immigration station is a bit of a misnomer. While this place did process immigrants, it is better known for its role in two different periods of xenophobic hysteria. The first being the period of Chinese exclusion, where Chinese immigrants were denied admittance into the United States of America for 61 years. If they did arrive, they were incarcerated at this station. The second would be during World War II, when Japanese American citizens were held out of fear that they would communicate and coordinate with the Japanese Empire. The photos here are of the barracks at Angel Island, and one of the rooms in the barracks building that holds in memory these chapters of our national history. One moving and interesting thing here was that there was still writing on the wall of people's names, and even of poetry. This is a reproduction of some of the poetry, but there's also a nice memorial wall outside along the water where families of those who were incarcerated and detained at Angel Island hold their loved one in memory. That evening, I flew from San Francisco to Anchorage, arriving to a midnight dusk, which was kind of unreal. And the next morning, I met up with a new friend from the local Audubon Society to visit Anchorage area parks for a variety of possible birds. This is the view outside the hotel. Alaska is amazing. We missed out on any and all ptarmigans, but I did get to see golden crowned sparrow, varied thrush, this cooperative red-throated loon, fox sparrows, and a number of eye-level white-winged crossbills, which was a different experience for me because they're always flying away from me. I always see them from the backside. That evening, I met the tour group for an evening dinner, get to know you kind of event, and the next day we made our way to NEMN and then on to Gamble on St. Lawrence Island. Here's our plane, a lovely small 10-seater. After a little bit of birding along the river and road near the airport in Nome, this plane took us across the patchy sea ice of the Bering Sea out to St. Lawrence Island. The sea ice was a sign of things to come. It had been one of the snowiest winters on record across Alaska, and the island was still waiting for a thaw. We did get it a few days in, but we had temperatures consistently in the low 30s and wind chills in the teens. And once again, this is late May, early June. So I had already experienced some spring here and went back to winter, much to my dismay. Here we arrived at Gamble, where we were met by an ATV with trailer, ready to take our luggage to the hotel, which is on the right. Transportation on the island is primarily by ATV. I think I saw 3 other vehicles. I was the most experienced ATV driver in our group, having grown up riding them, having used them for snow removal at home, so it should not be surprising that I got stuck in the snow more than anyone else. So embarrassing. Our rhythm of life during our 8 days there would be a quick morning snack, followed by Sea Watch. We would line up the ATVs to serve as a windbreak. Even for Minnesotan, it got pretty chilly. The windbreak helped a little bit. Following the Sea Watch, we would have a full breakfast. And then we would typically walk what's called a boneyard. That's what it is, it's a boneyard. Located in different parts of the village of Gamble are these fields where there are the scattered remains of bones from whales, walruses, and seals harvested by the Yupik people. The Yupik continue some of their traditional subsistence lifestyle ways, hunting for their food. This included hunting some of the same birds we were looking at. So the emperor goose we were looking at was actually endangered. But we'd sometimes have to avoid an area when we saw hunting going on. A harvested seal or whale would be dressed at a boneyard so that once the meat, fat, skin, ivory, baleen, and all that was taken, the remains would decompose and add itself to the bones of generations of remains in the boneyard. We walked upon these generations of remains in the boneyard in search of birds because the bones would create tussocks and clumps of grass and snow where the birds would often drop in for shelter after a night of travel. It was actually a really enjoyable way to bird. Here's a future addition to the boneyard. This whale was harvested just a couple of weeks prior. There's some drying racks as well. There were a ton of gulls around, but the villagers deterred thievery on their drying racks by shooting a culprit and hanging it near the rack. The gulls are smart enough to get the picture. After lunch, we might search for birds next to the mountain, as it's called, as we four-wheeled our way to some of the marshes and another sea watching spot in a different part of the area. After supper, it was much the same. We would revisit a marsh, or the mountain road, or the boneyards. It was bright up until about 3 a.m., but the latest we ever stayed out was 10 or 10:30. Gamble is only about 40 miles from Russia, and you can see Russia there above the village. I don't know if you can see it that well in this lighting, but also illuminated there on the horizon.
Where is it on the map?
Right here is Gamble. This is St. Lawrence Island. Here is Gamble. So there's Russia with Berinia National Park there. So I could see Russia from where I was. Yeah. So this is why myself and the others were all there. Hemispherical designations begin to break down at this amorphous zone between Eurasia and North America. But the birds don't really obey our stenciled globes or our rigid definitions of where they belong. Here, birds from both sides of the Bering dwell together. Even though we were technically in North America, some continental species would be considered quite rare there, while Eurasian species would be expected. At the human, cultural, and geopolitical level, too, this is a region across which ancestors of the indigenous peoples of our continent migrated and settled. That migration continues today. Nearly a decade ago, Russian defectors survived Siberia, braved the Bering, and ended up landing at Campbell. Their boat remains. It's affectionately known as the Russian boat, which the bird guides use as a marker to help people know where a bird is at. The pup is, well, there's dogs everywhere. You know, as you might imagine, this is a traditional kind of village. The dogs run free. This one is known as Snowball, a village dog that often jumps up and rides on the ATVs of the birding groups, and that often needs to be distracted when a rare bird is located. So a member of the group would be like, oh, come over here, Snowball, or else that bird's going to flush. So, good old Snowball. Speaking of birds, one of the fun surprises was seeing some of the birds that we get in migration and in non-breeding plumage in their breeding plumage, in a place where they are in the other part of the year. Birds like snow buntings were super abundant, as were Lapland longspur. Every other bird seemed to be a Lapland longspur or a snow bunting. Pretty much upon arrival, we began to see the specialties of the island, things like wood sandpiper, common snipe, a distant flying away from us eastern yellow wagtail, Pacific golden plover, Eurasian skylark, red-throated pipit, I'm just naming all the birds I don't have a photo of, rustic bunting, Terrick sandpiper, and common ringed plover, like this one here. There's also semi-palmated plover, so it was, a little bit of work sorting those out. We had decent looks at this and another red-necked stint. Maybe you can see it there. A shorebird that ranges from Siberia to Australia. Decided to drop in at Gamble to say hello. We saw a few northern wheat ear, another Eurasian bird, a couple of blue throat, which were quite skittish. So like this is the closest we could get. It blends in nice with the colors of the tundra on the rocks there, but right there, I wonder why it's called a blue throat. So another bird from Asia. And of course, gulls. I couldn't help but think that Christina and Clinton would be in a dazed, euphoric state. The Vega subspecies, well actually now it's a bird on its own species, a Vega gull. Here it was just separated from the herring gull. We had juvenile glaucous gull and some adult glaucous gulls. Savins gull for a few days giving us great looks, doing their little dance on the water. Black-legged kittiwake, of course the juveniles are much better looking, so that's why I have a picture of the juvenile, that kind of M marking. We had a black-headed gull drop in. That's a primarily Asian species. I saw it in Israel a few years ago. And of course, on the island there's a dump. And so where there's a dump, there are gulls, and there's likely to be something rare in the dump. And from the time back in Nome, before we got on the plane to get to the island, a short-billed gull as well. And if I'm wrong with any of these identifications, I hope to hear from the experts. But the gull we were most excited to spot was ivory gull. It was the only one we had, but it was a real treat. It flew by us a couple of times. It rested on the water for a while, kind of far away, but the looks were still pretty good. We overheard something like, oh, that's a tern. No, it wasn't. It was this ivory gull passing overhead. So nice Arctic species coming to say hello to us. Not only were there gulls, but we had a number of parasitic and Pomeranian Jaeger, which we get here on the lake in the fall. But there's also quite a few long-tailed Jaegers. Jaeger, the plural problem once again. One of these just about clipped a member of our group as well when they weren't paying attention. But super cool birds. At Sea-Watch, we would sort through flocks of eiders and scoters, mostly by taking as many photos as possible and sorting through them later. We would call out, somebody would see eiders and they'd yell out, eiders! And we would just all point and click with our cameras pretty much. In hopes of spotting a spectacled eider, which we never did. We mostly had king eiders. as well as a number of common eider, which is just a handsome bird. It's a good-looking bird.
It deserves a better name.
Yeah, it's an uncommon eider, perhaps. Beautiful eider. We also had a couple of Stellar's eider, but I didn't get a very good photo of those. We had thousands upon thousands of thick-billed and common myrrh. Nice little flying penguin-y kind of guys. We had way too many white-winged scoters. Too many because, once again, we were just taking pictures of scoter after scoter to sort through them for Steiniger scoter, which we were successful in finding a few times. It's like the size of the knob or the shape of the knob on their bill is a little bit different than the white-winged scoters. We had surprise flyby of bristle-thighed curlew and a Eurasian wimbrel within minutes of each other, which caused some confusion in the group. And these were on each side of the ivory gull sighting. So it was a really exciting, 10-minute span. Yeah, it was rocking, even though it was, 14 degrees with the wind. We had white wagtail, another Eurasian species. They were fairly common on the island. Western sandpipers were everywhere, one of the more common birds, and they were really beautiful in their breeding plumage. Of course, we don't get very many of them here at all. And maybe if you winter in Florida, you see them quite a bit more often. There were good numbers of red-necked and red phalaropes as well. My wife loves the phalarope for the little spinny dance. She's like, why are you talking about me again? We spent one morning at the cliffside of the mountain. This was our opportunity to try to get a better look at the hundreds of thousands of auklets that were routinely viewed gracing the surface of the water as they flew out to feed or were coming back to roost. Look at them all. You can see all those are birds there in the sky over there. Here we were able to see least auklet, little cuties, crested auklet, and parakeet auklet. We had hoped to spot a dovekey on the mountainside, which we did not. It has been a few years since they nested there, and they seem to be in decline in the Bering region. We did luck into 4 flyby dovekeys in the final hours of our tour, but I didn't get a very quality photo of them. They're just a little grapefruit-sized birds, so flying over the ocean is a little hard. One delightful sighting was of this Arctic fox, looking for food among the auklets on the mountain. I'd like to finish up my time in Gamble with a couple of highlight birds for me, including this McKay's bunting. Another tour group, we had overlapping tour groups there. They left we arrived on a day, they left, halfway through the week. Another tour group arrived at the same time. Another tour group radioed this bird in, and we were pretty much as far south as we could go. So we hopped on the ATVs and drove straight into the north wind as fast as we could for a number of miles, risking frostbite for the sake of this bird. By the time we got there, they had lost it. And so our groups came together to scour the boneyard for it. It flushed, and we all began to head toward it, but then a member of our group said that, it came right back. So there was a lot of confusion. Some of us went the original way, others of us went the new way. It turned out the second bird was a snow bunting, and we risked missing the McKay's bunting with that distraction. Luckily, it was really confiding and unhurried, and everyone was able to get great looks at it, even sneaking up on it a little bit. Yeah, that was a good picture. I'm happy with that. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Birding in this way, and in this setting, and in this weather is pretty exhausting. So sometimes members of our group would stay behind to rest instead of going on the afternoon or the post-supper time excursions. One evening, just 2 of us joined the guide. It was like having a private guide, it was great. And we were lucky that we did. While birding in the marsh, our guide spotted what was my favorite bird of my whole sabbatical time, the Siberian sand plover. The name of this species, its presence in North America, really drove home the point to me that birds are capable of challenging all of our notions about where creatures, where human beings belong, and where they find themselves. This Siberian species also filled me with unexpected wonder because it challenges not just our ideas about geography and belonging, but also about time. You see, this Siberian sand plover is a bird from the future. Given that the international dateline is only 20 miles away from where we viewed this plover, we might think it came to us from tomorrow. A gift from the future in the present. I feel like there's a promise there somewhere that this bird has been to tomorrow and came out okay. Now I'm preaching. Moving on. He is a cutie. When the Gamble tour concluded, I ended up back in Anchorage, where I met up with my wife Liz. The next day, we ventured north of the Arctic Circle to the Inupiaq village of Kotzebue. Kotzebue is a community along the Chukchi Sea, part of the Arctic Ocean. For listers of oceans, I got another check. We had these fun ice floes running and whistling along the coast as ice exited from nearby riverways into the sea. This was our base for a few days for exploring some indigenous history and also some national parking. While visiting the Northwest Alaskan Arctic Heritage Center, I discovered that the Bering Land Bridge, across which indigenous Asians traveled in multiple waves to populate the Americas between 12 and 40,000 years ago, was actually quite large. I always thought it was just these peninsulas joining together. And I still thought that after having done some extensive reading on the subject to prepare for all of this. It amazed me as well to think about how many communities must have dotted this vast landscape that now reside under the sea. It's probably a frontier of archaeology. Here we go, ready to go on a flight scene tour of national park sites. It was also a disturbingly small plane. Never in my life. Some views of Kotzebue, the village back there on that peninsula, and some riverways from the plane. We flew to some of the most inaccessible national park sites in our country. When somebody else is paying for it, you do it. Parks like Gates of the Arctic National Park. We landed briefly at the sand dunes at Kobuk Valley National Park, which was pretty great. Long story short, we had one plane excursion to 2 parks and another plane excursion to another 2 parks back to back. And so I think we had 8 or 10 people on this one, and then we had only 3 of us on kind of the next leg. Here's some tundra at Cape Krusenstern National Monument, and a view of Noatak National Preserve from a mountaintop that our plane landed on. There were some great looking tundra plants and wildflowers this time of the year. However, the highlight of this flight scene tour was seeing these musk oxen. This was really zoomed in and through the distortion of the glass on the plane, but still it was super cool to see these reintroduced furry friends out and about. We saw them both at Cape Krusenstern and at Noatak, actually. When our time in Kotzebue, above the Arctic Circle, came to an end, we headed back to Anchorage and journeyed down the Kenai Peninsula to Seward, a popular port for cruises, maybe if you've gone on any. There was chestnut-backed chickadee, bald eagle, and pigeon guillemot in the harbor there. We were here to visit Kenai Fjords National Park via a glacier tour and also to go on a wildlife cruise in Resurrection Bay, a wildlife we did see. Whales, orca and humpback. When I was in Gamble, I also saw gray whale and orca there. Sea otter everywhere and not a pet to keep. That's a good one. Sea lions everywhere. There are also some harbor seals that we saw. In my time in Gamble, I was able to see a bearded seal and a walrus, which I have, of the walrus, I have a Sasquatch Loch Ness Monster quality photo of. So you can barely tell that it's a walrus. But, yeah. Mountain goats. And Ionic Glacier, not a creature, but definitely a feature of migration as they expand and recede. Mostly recede. And where there are glaciers in this region, there are glacier specialties like this Kitlitz's murrelet. We also have, I don't know, why? Does anybody know why? Why the glacier water specialty for the bird? Interesting. I'm looking at you, you're the expert. I don't know. We also have marble and ancient murrelet as well while in Alaska. And one struggles to think of coastal Alaska apart from puffins. We had a horned puffin and tufted puffin. Also had them in Gamble, but they weren't on the water as much there. They were flying by. And of course, there were colonies of kittiwake, scads of gulls, including this one. I call this gull peers from the void of existential angst. I named him Kierkegaard. Alaska was my favorite. The range of boreal forests, mountain and tundra to coastal rainforests and glaciers was pretty awesome. If you all would like to fund a return trip, I'll take you up on it. The final phase of my sabbatical time had me going to Cape May, New Jersey for a 24-hour pelagic seabird tour. This means boarding at night and heading out as far as we can go on the ocean and birding our way back to shore. One problem, however, Hurricane Ernesto in August prompted a somewhat short notice cancellation. Although quite a ways out to sea, the storm was causing swells upward of 10 feet. For the sake of our safety and our comfort, and for the benefit of the boat janitorial staff, the trip would not happen. Instead, I would quickly sign up for some land-based field trips with the New Jersey Audubon Society at Higbee Beach in Cape May, and also up the shore a little bit at Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge. I then went and explored some national parks on my own. Then my family would fly and meet me in New York City, where we would do some immigration learning and also act the part of tourists. So off to Cape May, New Jersey. It's a popular, well-known site for North American birding. It was kind of a shoulder season. Not a lot was going on there at this week in August. The famed Cape May Lighthouse, a distant view of Atlantic City, where Donald Trump was at that very moment we were at the National Wildlife Refuge. So you can almost see him over there across the marsh. So Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge in New Jersey. I didn't have very many target birds for the terrestrial portion of this phase, because I've seen quite a few of them, but I did enjoy seeing quite a few birds like exotic mute swans. On the East Coast, there's quite a few around. I don't know what that is exactly, but you can almost see through its nostril there to the other side. There were lots of shorebirds, especially stilt sandpipers, yellowlegs, dowitchers, western and least sandpipers right next to each other, which was nice. Black skimmer are kind of magical to me. Just a super cool bird. And this young Caspian tern just had some striking patterns on it. So I was able, some of the guides on this field trip actually were supposed to be on the pelagic tour with me and ended up leading this thing, because what else are they going to do? So they figured out I was from Minnesota, and they tried to find a bird that they knew I would not have seen before up here, which they were able to locate for me, which is a salt marsh sparrow. And that's important to me because if I was just out there on my own in the marsh, driving the roads, what are the odds looking for this, bird in the reeds? So it was nice that they pointed it out for me. There were also some other critters that I enjoyed as well. I think that's a Luna moth. I don't know for sure. Other people know these things. And then it was on to New York City. My family was supposed to join me there at around midnight, but storms near the city delayed them, and they didn't get into our lodging until 5 a.m. And then we had a 7 a.m. wake-up call so we could get to the Statue of Liberty. There she is, a beacon and symbol of welcome for those arriving in New York Harbor. A quote from Isak Dinesen caught my eye at the Statue of Liberty exhibits. It reads, "If I could only so live and so serve the world, that after me there should never again be birds in cages." We visited Ellis Island and spent time with the many exhibits there that told the story of the immigrant experience, the process of admission, of being examined and scrutinized, the different way that went if you were rich, the ways the process has changed over the years to become more restrictive now than ever before, the way we have often portrayed these newcomers as vermin, as beasts, as apes, as rats, in order to dehumanize them. It was a moving, memorable place to visit. And of course, we had to visit the places associated with America's most well-known immigrant, Founding Father Alexander Hamilton. Our eldest child was thrilled to visit his gravesite and that of his wife, Eliza. And also, we visited their little house in Harlem where they figured it out. We also entered into the story not just of those who were immigrants proper, but those whose life journey had them navigating a world that excluded and denied them because of what they looked like or because of who they loved. We visited Stonewall National Monument. We went to the African Burial Ground National Memorial, which remembers what New Yorkers had forgotten until they tried to construct a new skyscraper. That below the building site were the remains of carefully buried and cared for humans of African descent. Some were slaves, others were the descendants of slaves, still others were free, but their story is now told and remembered. We went to Chinatown, which is in a neighborhood steeped in immigrant history as it transitioned from Irish to Italian to Chinese residents. Of course, we were mostly there for the dim sum. A highlight of our New York City experience was going to 2 programs at the Tenement Museum on the Lower East Side neighborhood. This apartment complex was purchased to be a museum, with each tenement being restored to tell the story of immigrants from different nationalities over different eras. Our first program featured an actor playing the part of a 1910s Turkish teenager who told us about her life. The second program told the story of the ascent of an 1860s Irish family up the ladder of respectability and acceptability, and connected that experience to the experience of African Americans. I would highly recommend that everyone visit, if they go to New York City, the Tenement Museum. And of course, some touristy things. We saw the One World Trade Center and the 9/11 Memorial Pool. We strolled through Central Park, where we saw so many rats. So many rats. Rats in the leaves, rats in the grass, rats jumping up this high off the ground. We also viewed a Cooper's hawk reducing the rat population by 1. We went up the Empire State Building and were briefly accosted by a great primate. Some street level views here. Oh, Empire State level view, and also a view of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And of course, when in Rome or New York City, wherever we're at, you have to see a show. And so we saw a show that actually touches deeply on the themes of difference and diversity and how a community welcomes or excludes. We saw Wicked, which was wicked awesome. Okay, so some thoughts on integrating birds and borders. Really, these thoughts are just that, reflections connecting the experience of birding, the birds, and the human experience of immigration. To be sure, I'm going to be thinking more deeply about these things and connections in days to come. Some rudimentary thoughts. First, some thoughts on birding. For me, birding itself is an exercise of imagination. When I go out to look for birds, there's no telling what you might encounter. Although I have an idea what might be expected, there's always the possibility of coming across something unexpected. Birding itself then is a practice of learning to become open to the impossible, an exercise of expanding imagination. It teaches me that there's something out there just beyond, just outside of my experience, that is capable of producing celebration and wonder. When so often, we are taught to fear the unknown and unexpected. When the unexpected shows up, like a red-flanked bluetail in New Jersey last year, or even here at McQuaid Harbor when the final Pepla showed up. Well, birders are well practiced in imagination, in looking for the unexpected, in hoping for, looking for, desiring for the unexpected to show up. Community is created as people buy plane tickets, they drive overnight, they drop everything to go and experience this bird, which was thought to belong elsewhere, but has found its way here. When this happens, a community comes together joyfully around attentiveness to this visitor from afar. That community also is filled with worry. When one of these rarities appear, birders express empathy and concern. How did it get here? What must it have went through? It might not last long in this climate or habitat. Should something be done? Encounter with a bird that we did not expect or that we didn't think belonged here brings out this sort of compassion from us. The imagination expanding act of birding, the developing orientation toward impossibilities, the community of delight and compassion that is nurtured in it, can affect how we view and treat human migrants, making their own journeys across our so-called settled boundaries, themselves imagining a new life and a fresh start. They are an out-of-place presence that rather than instill fear or resentment in us, could fill us with joy and empathy. Birding could lead us there. Some thoughts on what birds might teach us. What do borders even mean? Looking for birds in these liminal zones between nations, between hemispheres and continents, and even between days, challenges us to reconsider our thinking about location and about what location is appropriate or home for a creature. There are primarily Eurasian species that dwell in North America. There are primarily Mexican and Central American birds that dwell in the United States. So what are these birds? Are they Eurasian? Are they North American? Are they Mexican? Doesn't matter. The birds train us to grow comfortable with the discomfort of having our geopolitical certainties questioned. When they cross those thresholds in the thousands or millions in the middle of the night, birders get their gear ready and they seek to welcome them. We don't ask for their papers or detain them. We set up bird feeders to meet their needs. The migration of birds is a given of sorts, a given that tends not to apply to human beings on the move. What would it look like for us to approach human migrants in a similar way? To do so, we have to reconnect with our own human story of being migratory creatures. You know, people love to do all of the genealogy work and track how their ancestors came to be in the United States. Maybe some of you have done that. People are really intrigued by how the Americas were populated by indigenous ancestors and sojourners through Asia, through Beringia to here. Yet we still see all of that as different in some way from the natural course of things, from that instinct to move. We have a hard time seeing ourselves as creatures. There was a World War II era resistance pastor in Germany named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Maybe you've heard of him. There's a movie coming out about him. I hear it's not very good. You might have heard of him because he was involved in a few assassination attempts on Hitler's life. He has a little-known writing from his early years as a theologian called Creation and Fall. In that writing, he interprets original sin in that Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve story as human beings not wanting to be creatures. They thought there was a deeper, better dimension of existence that had them above and beyond creatures. Ironically, that disavowal of life as a creature has repeated itself in the very tenets of religious faiths that have taught that humanity is something other than an animal, something better. Our technological progress and political and cultural developments have likewise affirmed that perspective, making us see ourselves as something other than a creature. The birds, I think, are capable of reconnecting us to our creatureliness. When we are attentive to and follow their seasonal movements, we ourselves are restored in a rhythm that belongs to us as creatures. We are migratory. Acceptance of our existence as creatures for whom migration is central to human life and not an outlier might give us different approaches to solving issues around immigration. Birds, it is a given, are creatures on the move, ones that we celebrate and welcome. Human beings, too, are creatures on the move, toward whom the birds lead us to have a different perspective. And some thoughts on what immigrating people might teach us. For a very long time in the history of this nation, there's been a seasonal pattern of temporary workers, especially in the field of agriculture. This seasonal pattern are people coming across the border for work. There's a lot of things to unpack there as far as policy goes and ethical concerns about vulnerable people being taken advantage of. But I want to center in on how that might reframe our thinking about birds. Where is home for a migrating bird? Is it the breeding grounds or the non-breeding grounds? Where's a bird from? It's kind of messy, right? More than once, I have greeted a scarlet tanager or a rose-breasted grosbeak with, "Welcome home." What if they are just here to work? To reproduce? What if we thought of their origin of departure as their home? That they have come here for work, like many from south of the border have? What if we stopped thinking about such birds as ours and think of them instead as borrowed? Could that affect, too, how we perceive those wishing to come here for work? That like with birds, we are simply temporary custodians of their well-being while they are with us. Getting back to something Christina said earlier, what if some birds, like northern cardinal or red-bellied woodpecker, who have expanded their range to our area in recent years, could be seen as refugees, climate refugees, habitat degradation refugees, who, like some of our ancestors, needed to be on the move for the sake of survival. Immigrants escaping poor economic conditions and violent situations can teach us to see the birds as being in a similarly precarious spot, needing to venture on for the sake of their family or for generations to come. I could keep on going with thoughts about the many lives, human and bird, lost at sea in the attempt to migrate. The complicating questions around birds that are ship assisted. We are so fascinated with how did they get here? Birds and people. How the Statue of Liberty was a landmark for immigrants, much like certain terrain features in the stars are for navigating birds. How dehumanizing language toward immigrants, portraying them as animals, is a further example of our trying to escape being creatures ourselves, but could be co-opted and recycled to help us reclaim our creatureliness. So many other connections to make and to think through and be made. In any case, I hope sharing my adventures and imagination have helped you to think about what could be learned from holding bird and human migration together. And in closing, I'll point out this sign, which I also started with, which is at a bird feeder in the Chiricahua Mountains area, holding those two things together. Thank you for coming along with me on my journeys. Any other questions?
It's low power, it says. That's okay.
Now the question, someone just wondered about membership, is it time?
What's that?
Someone wondered if it's time to start sending in their membership.
Oh, somebody's wondering if they are, if it's time to send in your membership. Yeah, send in your membership if you want to join. It'll apply for 2025 after September 1st. That's what we do.
Did you get to witness or learn anything about whale migration?
Well, at Gamble, we witnessed, whale migration, gray whales, and orca coming through. I didn't learn anything. That was part of the hope of the Pelagic tour. Was there were supposed to be whales, sharks, different kinds of flying fish, and things like that. And so I didn't get to quite do that, but
Cool.
cool. Whales are cool. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, it's good to have people with.
I'm struggling to think of what this question is, but maybe it'll ping something.
Yeah.
you kind of touched on this. The sport of birding revolves around boundaries, county boundaries, national, state boundaries. And we get excited when birds show up on the wrong side of those boundaries. How does this, I'm sure you've thought about this and how it relates to the human obsession with boundaries.
Yeah. Well, I think that a few things. I think that can open us up to think a little more through what those boundaries even mean. But we do delight when those boundaries are transgressed. So I think that opens us up to maybe having a different attitude toward people when they transgress some of those boundaries. But also, maybe we learn to think a little more in terms of habitat as well. And if we think about habitat, what does that mean in light of some of our geopolitical realities of borders? When like the Sonoran Desert reaches down into Mexico, like that's all one habitat, one area, one series of landforms unique to that area. And so that's what that thought makes me think about is, you know, what if we thought about the world more in terms of habitat? Maybe we would lose some of that excitement of, oh, that's not supposed to be here. But also birds find themselves out of habitat as well. And we celebrate that. That's a good question.
What do you think, like, what was your most surprising takeaway personally from this experience?
Well,
Sorry.
it's not the kind of question I should have thought through ahead of time.
What was the question?
What was the most surprising or enlightening takeaway of the thing? And actually what that brings to mind, something that I've continued to think through, going back to this picture here. I forget which magazine it's from. I used to know the name of the artist, but I've forgotten it already. The many ways in which people throughout, not just in recent years, in this political climate, but in ages past as well, have talked about foreigners in terms of being animals. When we visited the Tenement Museum, our guide, our presenter put up a picture of an Irish maid who's looking really angry, and a dainty, white-presenting woman kind of afraid of the maid. And we were told what our thoughts were on this picture. Of course, it was an Irish maid who was made to look angry and upset, and nothing behind her, all the chores were not done as well. And she looked just like an ape. So intentionally portrayed as animal-like, as beastly. So something I've been thinking through is a lot of that rhetoric around human beings as animals, and how that's been used in negative ways, but also how it could be reclaimed to be like, we are animals. So that insult falls flat. You know, sticks and stones may break my bone, you know, but if we thought of ourselves more about as creatures who have an instinct to move and be on the move, we might not be able to use that as an insult anymore. We are animals. Yeah, so I'm thinking through a lot of that kind of stuff. But.
An interesting thought though about that human migration is that it's also, you talked about habitat. But for human migration, it's not just climate change, but it's also political and economic habitat that motivates migration. People move where they can get work and where they can be safe. And so there's a different kind of habitat when you're talking about immigration. Rather, some of it might be motivated by changing climate, but much of it is motivated by a different kind of habitat.
Yeah, thank you for that. Layers of habitat. Any other questions or comments before we close? A couple of announcements. A reminder that throughout November on Sundays at 10 o'clock is the Goal Watch at Superior Entry. It takes forever to get through Superior, but it's worth it. All right, so that's at 10 o'clock on Sundays in November. Any other announcements we need to make? If there's not a program in December, we take the month of December off. We'll be back at it in January.
This one was good enough for 2 months.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thanks for coming out tonight, and be safe and well.
Thank you.
Thank you.